Welcome to GCA Unmuted, the podcast where we share the stories and strategies that show how Georgia Cyber Academy makes online learning work. In a virtual school, we can't rely on hallway conversations or quick check-ins to know how students are doing. Instead, schools use data to notice patterns, spot concerns early, and make sure students get the support they need. I'm joined today by Taylor Lloyd, GCA's Assistant Principal of Operations for the primary grades. Her work puts her right in the middle of how data, systems, and people come together to support our youngest learners. So thanks for coming on, Taylor. We appreciate you. But first off, can you share a moment when you think that data really helped the school notice that a student or maybe even a group of students really needed support?
Yeah, it's hard to choose just one because we are definitely very data rich here at GCA. This is my 10th year here at GCA, and the processes for reviewing the data and looking at students has just vastly improved. We dig into the data so much here that there have been so many moments that I can think of, but not specific students. Like this worked here because we were consistently reviewing the data and consistently looking into our students' needs. So one thing that I think that we've really put an emphasis on that is relevant at this time is we really try to look at our third grade milestone scores, which we are just kindergarten through second grade here in PGB. And third grade's that first year that they're taking the milestones. So looking at third grade milestone scores and how they're performing to look at trends and gaps in things that our students in PGB need. What foundational skills may they be missing in our ELA class or in our math class? And where can we fill those gaps within our instruction here in K2 to build those foundational skills to get to third grade? So we really are intentional about looking at historical data and individual student data real time, but figuring out exactly what our students need. This year, a big focus is really digging in based on this milestone data that I'm talking about, digging into and strengthening our students' foundational fluency and literacy skills. If a student can't read, then there's a lot of foundational skills that they won't be able to do, right? So we, as a school, from the top with our superintendent, Mike, down to our teachers and our paras, all of us come together as one team and really dig into consistently reviewing that data and providing targeted instructions based on their needs from what we see from that fluency and literacy data. We don't wait to review it till the end of the year. We review all throughout the year and make those changes as needed. I think that is, it's hard to say one moment because we are consistently digging in all the time. And our K2 students grow academically at such different rates. It may take one student 3 weeks to master a concept that it takes another student 1 week to master. So consistently looking at the data daily and weekly overall is so important for our teachers because we could be missing instructional time by waiting until the end of an instructional cycle or the end of a semester before reviewing overall data. So it's super important for us to really be watching our students and knowing exactly where they're at so that we know, oh, now it's time to lay down that next foundational building block, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And how smart is that to look at the third grade milestone? That kind of gives you like a snapshot or a barometer of like, hey, how are we actually preparing our students, right? These K through 12 because you can't put it all on the third grade teacher, right? Like as much as you would want to, as much as you would want to be like, it's not us, it's third grade. That's a great point. Taylor, what does it really mean to use data to support students in a virtual school? Because you were talking about like We look at the milestones for third grade, and that kind of informs us a little bit on what we want to do. Or you have these different you have these different like data points of like very specifically and consistently and throughout the year, throughout the weeks, the months. But then you also have these like bigger data pieces that are showing everything, like you said, the milestones of like trends of students. So when you're trying to digest like data from the very specific pinpoints to also these like big picture data points, what do you think, like when you look at that, what do you think it actually means to say we're going to take these different data points, these bigger, these smaller, these wide, however, because there's so many different data points you can use. What does it really mean to say we're going to take these data pieces and support students in a virtual school?
Yeah, so I would like to say first that before any data or graphs or charts, we really try to be intentional at primary that every one of those numbers is a student who has a story.
Hmm.
So when we are intentional about that, the whole shift in mindset when you're looking at that data completely changes. So we're not just looking at, oh, this was a pain point necessarily in these third grade overall, but we had these third grade students in kindergarten, first, and second grade. Where are the gaps? Why did they not get this? Was it an instructional gap? Was it something that we need to revamp on our processes and procedures when mapping out our curriculum? Is it something that we need some type of asset to help support our curriculum or resource or something additional? So, really trying to think of our students' stories. Were there students who were struggling with maybe being displaced? There was a large number of displaced students, or there was a large number of whatever the case may be. When the points on the chart turn to students and their stories, everything can shift and really be relevant. So when we're looking at going back to your question, that's the first piece of it is every student has a story. So what is that story? How long have they been receiving support? Are they receiving the support that they need? This group of students that make up this number, what is their story? So each leadership team throughout our district does a phenomenal job of working with our district at digging in and trying to figure out more about the individual score and the historical data overall. We really want our teachers to understand and buy in to the truth of knowing that building connections and relationships with our students is what moves the needle. The data is just a tool to help us support our students to grow academically. So when we focus first on building our relationships with our students and building connections with our students, because we have students with all different backgrounds here at GCA, and that's something that I love about GCA, it just really helps the data move a little bit on its own anyways. Of course, we have to put in the hard work and the footwork and plan and make sure that we know what our students need, but we can't plan exactly for what our students need or build the foundational blocks that are going to help them become proficient on milestones without actually knowing who our students are and what their stories are. So in virtual school, it is important because it's easy to lose sight, especially when you're out of the classroom with the students every day. It's easy to lose sight of the intentional, this is someone's baby that we're looking at. It's very easy to lose sight of that. So being intentional really helps us know, okay, here's where these students are. This is why, if there is a why, this is why they may be performing like this. We're not walking down the hallway and putting our hands in each classroom. We're popping in virtually. So those students don't know us like they would if they were in a classroom. But our teachers, we are improving as leaders. I will say, getting into classrooms just to say hi, just to be there, not just for classroom observations, but really trying to make the connections with our students, making phone calls that are just positive phone calls to families. And that helps move the needle. Our new teachers, I hear in interviews often, we are not sure how to make connections with students online. We're not sure to how to look at the data and know what our kids need online. And then when they're a few weeks or maybe a month in, a lot of times they'll say, I know my kids better here at GCA than I did in brick and mortar, because you have to be so much more intentional than a lot of times than you were in brick and mortar. So I really think that like I said before, connections and relationships are what move the needle and allowing our teachers to build that space to build relationships with our students really help set our students up for success.
Sure. No, that's a great point. What would you say or add in terms of what about the students that seem like they're doing well and they have mastery can you explain a little bit about the flexibility that GCA offers? Are some students do they earn flexibility where they have optional live attendance, or is that not actually a thing in the primary grades? Can you tell us, because that's also a data piece, right? Saying that, like, look, this student is proving mastery. They actually they're showing they can actually do it on their own or whatever. We can give them some flexibility. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how the data helps with flexibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is actually an entire process within my team. We review the data for all students every single cycle. And there are certain criteria points that would show the student has mastered in this subject area. And if they have met each of those points, they absolutely can earn flexibility. We do require in PGB, because there are so many foundational skills, that just because, like I said earlier, just because you've mastered, this in week one, as the rigor increases throughout the year, the mastery could slowly start going away because that topic or standard is getting harder, and you may not have mastered it 6 weeks later. So we do require check-ins with our teachers, and they have to one-on-one check in with that teacher. They also have to attend all of our assessments live, because that has to be monitored by GCA policy. But they are required, if you have received flexibility in either ELA, math, or both, you're required to check in with your teachers to make sure that as this rigor is increasing and you are possibly working on things asynchronously and watching recordings, that you still are on track. Because once you start slowly losing the foundational skills as the rigor increases, that jump to third grade can become a deficit, and we want to make sure that you stay proficient as you go into third grade. So that is reviewed. Our flexibility is reviewed every single instructional cycle, and you can earn flexibility based on your proficiency, and you can lose flexibility. So just because you are flexible first semester or first quarter does not mean that second quarter you will be. That also can change in the middle of a quarter. So you can earn or lose it, and it is not a punishment. I want to point that out. It's not a punishment if you lose flexibility. We just want to know that you are on track, and it is our job to serve every student to the best of our ability and provide excellent instructional quality to our students. And so if we feel like you're no longer proficient in this area, we will require you to come back to class.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's probably one of the biggest ways that you're like, hey, I'm going to use data to support this, because you're saying this student went from doing well to now not, and so they need extra support. So that's all you're doing. You're right. It's not a punishment. When you say cycles, it sounds like you're saying every 6 weeks, I think I heard. So we have instructional cycles that are every 6 weeks. Is there a test or a data point that y'all are using there every 6 weeks for students?
So it's 9. The instructional cycles are every 9 weeks, and there are interim assessments. In those, we have district wide. So we have interim assessments every 9 weeks, and that is just a piece of the puzzle, though. We are really increasing our fluency foundation, as we talked about, in those skills that we need them to gain with their fluency and literacy, comprehension, understanding, just the foundational building blocks there. So those are one-on-one with the teacher. And those are throughout each 9-week cycle. They're kind of sprinkled throughout. So we have those formal interim assessments, and then we have checks for math and literacy one-on-one with your teacher throughout the entire year.
Oh, wow. So when you're thinking about the kind of information, the kind of data you're using to say, this is how we know students are doing well or students need extra support, what information do you think is most valuable in giving you that? So is it those fluency checks you just mentioned? Is it the interim assessments? Is it the third grade milestones? I understand you're probably going to say, well, Halton, it's a couple of those. But what would you say, like, this is the information that we think is really most helpful when we're trying to understand how our students are doing?
So I would say, yes, it is a combination of all of them because students may have a bad day and they didn't do great on this just because they're having a bad day. And we totally understand that. And that is why we look at multiple data points to help us build that story with our students. I would say one-on-one is definitely the most helpful when our students are young. If you think kindergarten, they're starting at 5 years old. And that is truly someone's baby. I think back to when my kids were 5 and I could still carry them on my hip. They were really, truly my baby. So when you think about a 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, parents don't want them to fail. They don't want them to do poorly. And sometimes they provide assistance, which is not helpful. If any parents are watching this, please do not help your students. But the assessments like our pre-admission iReady assessment or our mid-year diagnostic or the IAs, we do our best and monitor all of our students. And we are watching just as you would in a classroom, walking around up and down the aisles through the desk, but we don't have eyes everywhere at all times. And so sometimes those scores may be a little inflated due to some type of parent help or support. And the one-on-one assessments is just less formal. Kids are already in small groups. They're being pulled with their teacher, and they literally are just checking for understanding. Let's just look at this. It could take 60 seconds. And because we do those so often, I would say that is the most useful piece of data that we have because someone is not whispering in their ear how to answer that. It's just a little less formal, and it truly, all assessments, we try to really emphasize this to our parents. We're not, especially in K2, because we have standards-based grades, you're not going to get a 50 if you do poorly on the IA or on the pre-admission testing. You're not going to fail a class because of that. We have to have the accurate results to be able to target instruction for their specific child. So if the results in the data is not correct because they received some type of support, then we are ineffectively providing instruction for students because we don't know exactly where they're at. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, I would definitely say one-on-one assessments just because they're just authentic. It's a conversation.
Mm-hmm. When teachers, and those are teachers that are doing those one-on-one assessments. So
Yes.
how are they recording? Are they recording that
Yeah.
somewhere? How are they recording that? And is that something that your team can go back and look at, or they can, or how is that really actually tracked?
It is a great question. And it is something we have worked really hard on this year. So fluency checks are actually new this year. It is a new initiative, I guess you could say, that in primary we have put in place for the need for real, authentic, quick, relevant, and often data,
Hmm.
just to be able to constantly review and analyze that data. And because it is new, we found the need to find somewhere to keep up with it, but we need to be able to track trends, growth, proficiency, all of the things for every teacher. So we actually created a master data tracker here in primary. It is a shared spreadsheet with all 75 homerooms or whatever
Hmm.
that exact number is. Every teacher records their score for their math one-on-one checks and their ELA one-on-one checks. And they record it all in that same spreadsheet. So my team builds pivots and graphs and computes growth, proficiency for mid-year or beginning of the year to mid-year to end of the year, and beginning to end. So we can track the different types of growth in each area or bucket, if you will. And that tracker has been extremely helpful because it gives a easy, quick overview of where students are at that time. It also is very comprehensive because it has when a student started. So if they didn't have a literacy score in August, you can say, oh, well, they didn't start until November. That makes sense of why that score is not there. It also has their iReady scores. It has their IA scores. It has the percentage of scores that they may have a 1 in, which in standards-based grading means you have not met that standard. Does not meet is what a 1 means. So it gives a whole look at the child, which again is just points on a graph until we dig in further and say, Taylor has this, this, and this. Taylor also is dealing with this at home, or whatever the case may be. Taylor also, if she's passing and doing great and is reading on a 4th grade reading level in 1st grade, Taylor may need to be referred to gifted. So calling our students by name and knowing exactly where they're at, it is amazing. Our leaders at primary meet with our teachers every single month. Every month, our teachers are talking about their data and their students with an AP or our principal in our building. And it is amazing what our teachers know about their students. And they don't have notes. They immediately call them off by name. Taylor and Halton are doing this, and this is what I've seen in class, and this is where they've grown, and this is what they need. And we have those data conversations every month, and it is just incredible. And we're also seeing growth because our teachers know their students. They really, truly know them.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about saying that your team and you are intentional about making sure that data points are first students, that it's not numbers. And that's such a good reminder. You're kind of touching on how the data team, the operations team works with the instructional team, particularly that tracker. Is there anything more you would want to add to that about how those teams really work together, how they use that tracker to then inform instruction? Is there anything else you could add there?
Yeah, so my team prepares the data for our teachers, and we collaborate with our instructional leaders first, just so everyone's on the same page, because like I said, we all are having these conversations with our teachers. So we all need the big picture and the overall trend so that when teachers are talking about those specific conversations with us, we have an idea of where our school is overall, where their grade level, where teachers compare in each grade level, things like that. So we meet every month as an instructional team with all of our instructional leaders, my team, operations team included, and kind of just talk about where we're at, what growth we're seeing, what gaps we may be seeing, and think through the best way for that month. What type of monthly conversations should we have this month with our teachers? For instance, in December, we talked about teachers' 5 lowest students and how they are supporting them. What targeted skills are you doing for each of the 5? Not these 5 overall, I'm doing this, but naming them and what are you doing to close these gaps that they may be seeing? What are you doing for your top 3 students? How are you enriching so that they're not bored and just sitting there staring at a screen or watching the TV behind their computer screen? So we meet as an instructional team first and come up with a plan so that PGB is cohesive and that we are all working towards the same end goal, which is student proficiency and providing the best and most excellent instruction that anyone could have the opportunity to receive. That is always the goal, and to meet students where they're at. And then we meet with those teachers. We plan with them. We brainstorm with them. They ask us things. We ask them, and just kind of that back and forth, very natural conversation. it's not a test. It is truly, where are your students? How can we best support them? How can we get all of them to the next level? Because Taylor and Halton aren't going to grow at the same rate. So what are we doing for each of our individual students to make sure that they reach that next level? And then at a district level, which I think is important to note too, our team, our operations teams within our district and our data teams and the curriculum teams collaborate on trends overall. So maybe grade level trends, grade band trends, top scores on this standard. How did we get that? Just kind of looking at historical data and data as of that date and come together with plans overall so that we can kind of bring those back to our school and work with our teachers on implementing things that are going to move the needle, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And we definitely do not do that here at GCA. We really are trying to be innovative and just really doing things differently until our kids are getting exactly what they need, because they deserve it.
Yeah, love that. Taylor, what do you think other schools then could learn from how GCA uses data to guide student support, like how they're going to instruct students or what have you?
Yeah, so I have been in a brick and mortar school before, have not ever been in another virtual school, but GCA is definitely the most data rich environment that I have ever been in, and it can be overwhelming. And I think that is not knocking on brick and mortar at all. It's just a lot easier to know your kids because you can touch their shoulder every day, right? And you're laying eyes on them every single day. I think that it is important to be intentional, and that is the key for me. Being intentional about looking at relevant data right away. A lot of times schools wait until the end of an instructional cycle, the end of a quarter, the end of a semester, or the end of the year to look at kind of what happened that year or what happened that semester. And that is overwhelming for teachers. Getting all of this information just kind of thrown at you like, this is all you need to see. Now, what do you do with it? It's an impossible task. So being intentional about looking and analyzing data often, and that really keeps that overwhelm down, and it makes teachers have the ability to be intentional about a plan for their students, to be able to say, this week they struggled with this standard that I taught. Next week, I'm going to do this differently. And all teachers pivot and differentiate. That is just in our blood. But being intentional about where they're at for small groups and those foundational skills, and not just saying this is the red, yellow, and blue group and this is who they are all year, but really differentiating and being intentional so that you can have a plan and not become overwhelmed when it becomes too much.
Right. So you've mentioned a ton of ways that GCA supports students and how we use data. Is there anything that you forgot to mention that you would want to mention now about, you know what, Halton, this really stands out to me about the way GCA uses data? Or is there something you've already mentioned that you would say, Halton, this is actually the thing that I think really stands out about the way GCA, what we do here, and how we support students using data? Like, is it the fluency checks that y'all are trying this year? Like, is it because that's a new thing, and it sounds like, I'm sure y'all are going to revisit that and see like, hey, did these checks work out, or is it something else?
I think that will definitely, I cannot wait to see that. And I don't have the answer, just to preface with, I don't know the exact answer. So this is definitely my opinion, but I am excited to see where our growth is with our literacy and fluency, and even things like math, like that fluency. that can get lost in the virtual world because you're teaching these standards and you don't have time to do time tests or whatever that may be. So when we implemented the fluency checks, it really allowed us to nail down maybe some of the foundational blocks that are missing so that we can catch those gaps and things before they get to third grade and before they get to that big year. And so I am excited to see that. I do think that that is going to help move the needle. I do think that our fluency gaps will close. Now, it will take a while for us to see the full implications of that data because our kindergartners won't be in third grade for a while. So we'll be able to see our individual scores, and we already are seeing growth. We have kids who, I want to say 40% of one of the grade levels, they've already met their end of the year benchmark where the state says you should be here by the end of this grade. 40% of the students in that grade level have met that in their reading fluency. So we are already seeing great benefits from what we are doing, but we have to continue to make sure or really see the full reward, I guess you could say, of this hard work that we're putting in. But I really think that the most important thing that we do and the thing that makes the most difference is how often we are looking at the data, the conversations that we are intentionally having within our teacher teams. They talk about that every single week within their team. Well, these students are struggling with this. Do you have any ideas for me for these students? Within our teachers and their grade band leaders, which is myself and my colleagues, and within our leaders in our district. So everyone is on the same page and the conversations are just so consistent that it's always at the top of your brain. And so I think our teachers just really taking ownership of their students and their data and being intentional about our conversations and building those relationships and connections with our students so that they want to learn, they want to be here. That is what I think really shifted. Things have changed so much at GCA since I've been here. Classes, the amount of students per class. When I taught kindergarten here, I had 80 homeroom kindergarten students. So now our kindergarten classes are between 18 and 22. So being able to provide the space, I think I said this earlier, to actually be intentional about building connections and relationships. You can't build great relationships with 80 kids right away, but our board has lowered those class sizes so that they can build those relationships, and the child on the other side of the screen is not scared of that teacher, and they are able to help grow and those data points increase. But until that relationship and connection is there and we are looking at every student as a story, there is no growth.
Mm. You've mentioned a few times, and so you've really any criticism that someone would say like data takes the human side out of things. You have addressed that, and you just did a number of times. Like we are going to um, make sure we refer to the person, the student by name before it's just a number. So I think that any criticism or critique somebody would have about like your team and y'all's approach, like you know what, y'all have really taken the human side out of it. Y'all have actually you're doing the human side first, and then looking at the data, and maybe that's one thing that really is the thing that you've learned. But before you go, will you tell us like what's the biggest lesson or just a lesson that you've taken away about like using data to support students well? Did I steal your answer by that by just harping on because this entire time like that's been a theme, you talking about the student first, student first, student first, and that trickling down to teachers mentioning their students first like before they even start getting into the numbers. But just tell us, Taylor, out of all the time that you've been doing this, like what's something that you're like, man, like that's something that I've really learned to take away about using data to support students well.
I would probably say that the data doesn't tell the whole story, and it is just I like to think of it as almost like a prescription for a piece of the puzzle to help our students succeed. And it's not just our students who may need remediation, but also those students who need enrichment. It is a great tool for us to use. But as I have been in education and at GCA, particularly, just learning that it is just a tool in the toolbox and it is not the answer for everything, I think has been the most valuable lesson. It is easy to look at a chart and become excited or discouraged, but when you get into a classroom and students are making real life connections that they've never made before, or they didn't know any of their letters in August and they may not be on benchmark or they may not be where they should at that point of the year, but they didn't know their letters and now they're reading CVC words. They're reading words and didn't even know their letters 3 months ago.
Mm.
When you know the whole story and celebrate the growth, regardless of what a chart tells us where our kids should or shouldn't be, and we celebrate those successes with our students, their confidence grows, and then they in turn academically grow. So it is just the connections and the relationships. And like you said, a lot of people don't actually love that answer. Like the data is the data. This is what it says, and this is what we're doing. But that really, when you are talking about children who are eventually going to become the next generation of our workers and who need to know how to read and to write and to communicate and how to connect with people, it is most important to focus on the child as a whole and not just the tool in your toolbox of that data point on a chart.
Mm, love that. That's so good. So here's today's big idea. When schools use data thoughtfully and act on it quickly and see them as students first, students get the support they need before small problems become big ones. Thanks again to Taylor Lloyd for joining us and sharing how insight and systems help support students in the primary grades. If this episode gave you a new way to think about data and student support, be sure to subscribe and join us next time on GCA Unmuted Voices of Virtual Education. Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks.